Marvel Studios just pulled the plug on their Hall H panel at Comic-Con, and now Thunderbolts is officially losing millions. If that doesn't scream trouble, then I don't know what does. The studio that once dominated pop culture is pulling back, delaying both Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. Meanwhile, Thunderbolts had great reviews, solid audience scores, and yet, it bombed. Unlike Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, The Marvels, or Captain America: Brave New World, Thunderbolts wasn't dragged down by bad reception. People liked it, but that wasn't enough. So what happened? And more importantly, what does this mean for Marvel moving forward? Let's dive in.
The numbers don't lie, and they spell disaster for you.
Let's start with the numbers. Thunderbolts needed $425 million to break even. As of now, it's sitting at $377 million globally. That means Marvel is looking at a loss of around $50 million. Now, losing money isn't unheard of in Hollywood, but for Marvel, this is a major red flag. Before Avengers Endgame, even Marvel's less beloved films were guaranteed to crack $500 million globally. Take Iron Man 3, it grossed $1.21 billion globally. The first Ant-Man movie grossed $519 million globally. Ant-Man and the Wasp grossed $622 million globally. Thor: The Dark World grossed $644 million globally. And Avengers: Age of Ultron grossed $1.4 billion globally. These weren't universally praised like Infinity War or Black Panther, but they were consistent hits. Even movies with mixed reception still pulled in strong global numbers. But since 2020, only 2 MCU movies have truly broken out of the box office. Spider-Man: No Way Home with a gross of $1.92 billion, and Deadpool and Wolverine with a gross of $1.3 billion. Before we get to Spider-Man: No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine, we need to talk about Phase 1 of the MCU, because its box office performance looked very different from what came later. Before the Avengers in 2012, Marvel's solo films didn't perform to modern MCU standards. Iron Man grossed $585 million worldwide, The Incredible Hulk only grossed $263 million worldwide, Thor only grossed $449 million worldwide, and Captain America: The First Avenger only grossed $371 million worldwide, but all of these movies had modest global earnings compared to later entries. But that was because the MCU was still in its infancy. The franchise didn't truly catch fire until the Avengers proved that the shared universe concept worked, and by the way, the Avengers came out and grossed $1.5 billion globally. Once audiences saw these characters come together, Marvel's box office numbers skyrocketed, turning even less beloved entries into guaranteed hits. After that, even weaker MCU films like Iron Man 3, Thor: The Dark World, and both Ant-Man movies still cracked $500 million globally. But now, that safety net is gone, and Thunderbolts is proof. Spider-Man: No Way Home wasn't just another superhero movie. It was a nostalgia-fueled event. Sony and Marvel tapped into audience familiarity, bringing back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, along with classic villains like Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, Sandman, and the Lizard. But here's the thing. If you didn't already know these characters, the emotional weight of their redemption arcs didn't land the same way. Take Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. His redemption in No Way Home only works if you remember Spider-Man 2, where he was a tragic villain manipulated by his own invention. The same goes for Jamie Foxx's Electro, who was given a second chance after his messy portrayal in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Even Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn, arguably the most iconic Spider-Man villain, had a redemption moment. But to fully grasp its significance, you had to remember that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man lost his best friend, Harry Osborn, because of Norman's actions. And that's where No Way Home faced criticism. It wasn't a standalone story. It relied on audience nostalgia to carry its emotional beats, rather than building them organically within the film itself. This is especially true in the final confrontation between Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Norman Osborn, when Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man steps in to save Holland's Peter from killing Osborn with his own glider. It's a powerful moment, but not because of Osborn himself. It directly mirrors Tobey Maguire's own past with Norman Osborn. In the first Spider-Man movie from 2002, Norman died by his own glider after Tobey's Peter jumped out of the way, leading to Harry Osborn blaming Spider-Man for his father's death. That resentment festered, culminating in Spider-Man 2 when Harry unmasked Spider-Man, realizing his best friend Peter Parker was the man he hated. That emotional weight pushed Harry into villainy in Spider-Man 3, effectively turning him into the new Goblin. Now, in No Way Home, Tom Holland's Peter was about to kill Norman Osborn with his own glider, just as Norman originally died, but Tobey stopped him, preventing Holland's Peter from making the same mistakes that had cost him his friendship with Harry. It's a moment that only fully resonates if you understand the history between Tobey's Peter and Harry Osborn, making it another example of No Way Home relying on past films for emotional depth rather than building it within its own narrative. For longtime fans, these moments felt earned, but for casual viewers or those unfamiliar with Sony's past Spider-Man films, No Way Home didn't fully stand on its own. Compare that to Thunderbolts, which didn't have nostalgia to lean on. It had to sell audiences on new characters, and when that failed, the movie collapsed at the box office. So while No Way Home was a massive success, it raises a bigger question. Can Marvel keep relying on nostalgia, or will audiences eventually demand something new?
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
Marvel's biggest hits now rely on legacy characters, and Deadpool and Wolverine is no exception. But while Ryan Reynolds and director Sean Levy claimed you don't need to see any prior MCU movie to enjoy it, that doesn't mean the film was entirely accessible. Because here's the thing, this Wolverine isn't the same one from Fox's X-Men movies. If you've seen Logan, that came out in 2017, you know that Hugh Jackman's Wolverine dies at the end of that film, closing the book on his character arc. But Deadpool and Wolverine introduces a different version of Logan, meaning audiences unfamiliar with the multiverse concept might struggle to understand why this Wolverine is back at all. And that's not the only deep cut reference. This film leans heavily into Marvel's messy history, throwing in nods to Wesley Snipes' Blade, Jennifer Garner's Elektra, and even Channing Tatum's Gambit, a movie that was announced in the 2010s but canceled after the Disney-Fox merger. The Blade reference is particularly interesting given the production issues surrounding the MCU's version of Blade with Mahershala Ali. It's almost as if Deadpool and Wolverine is mocking Marvel's inability to get certain projects off the ground, reinforcing its irreverent, self-aware tone. But here's the irony. Deadpool itself was never supposed to succeed. Back in 2016, 20th Century Fox didn't believe in Deadpool. They saw it as too risky, too R-rated, and too niche to justify a major investment. So instead of giving it a prime release window, they dumped it in February, a month historically known as a dump month in Hollywood, where studios release movies they don't expect to perform well. On top of that, Fox slashed the budget, giving Deadpool only $58 million, a fraction of what superhero movies were getting in the 2010s. And to make matters worse, the film was stuck in developmental hell for years until someone, possibly Ryan Reynolds or director Tim Miller themselves, leaked the test footage online via the Pirate Bay, sparking massive fan demand. Despite Fox's efforts to bury the movie, Deadpool obliterated expectations, pulling in $782 million globally, making it the highest grossing R-rated movie at the time. Meanwhile, Thunderbolts tried to position itself as the next big team-up, but audiences weren't invested in the characters the same way. And that's the difference. Deadpool was never supposed to succeed, but it forced its way into the mainstream. Thunderbolts, on the other hand, was designed to be a hit and still bombed. So here's the reality. Marvel's only true box office successes post-Endgame were built on nostalgia and legacy characters. Spider-Man No Way Home worked because it celebrated the past, bringing back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, along with classic villains like Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, Sandman, and the Lizard. But it wasn't a standalone story. It relied on audience familiarity with Sony's past Spider-Man films to deliver its emotional payoffs. If you didn't already know these characters, their redemption arcs didn't land the same way. Then there's Deadpool and Wolverine, which obliterated the box office, pulling in $444.3 million globally in its opening weekend alone. But despite Ryan Reynolds and Sean Levy claiming that you don't need any prior MCU knowledge to enjoy it, the film wasn't entirely accessible. This Wolverine isn't the same one from Fox's X-Men movies, and audiences unfamiliar with the multiverse concept might struggle to understand why he's back at all, especially since Hugh Jackman's Wolverine dies at the end of Logan from 2017. And let's not forget the deep cut references. Deadpool and Wolverine leans heavily into Marvel's messy history, throwing in nods to Wesley Snipes' Blade, Jennifer Garner's Elektra, and even Channing Tatum's Gambit, a movie that was announced in the 2010s but canceled after the Disney-Fox merger. The Blade reference is particularly interesting given its production issues surrounding the MCU's version of Blade with Mahershala Ali, almost as if Deadpool and Wolverine is mocking Marvel's inability to get certain projects off the ground. Meanwhile, Thunderbolts tried to position itself as the next big team-up, but audiences weren't invested in the characters the same way. And here's the problem. Marvel can't use the Phase 1 excuse anymore. Back in Phase 1, the MCU was still in its infancy, and its solo films didn't perform to modern MCU standards. Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America the First Avenger all had modest global earnings compared to later entries, but that was because the shared universe concept hadn't fully caught on yet. Everything changed with the Avengers, or Avengers Assemble, depending on the territory, which proved the formula worked, pulling in $1.5 billion globally and turning Marvel into a box office powerhouse. After that, even weaker MCU films like Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, and both Ant-Man movies still cracked $500 million globally. But now, that safety net is gone. We're in Phase 5, approaching Phase 6, and Marvel isn't in its infancy anymore. The franchise is established, yet its movies are struggling to maintain audience interest. Marvel's biggest successes now rely on nostalgia, legacy characters, and proven IPs, while newer projects, especially those without marquee characters, are floundering. And that's a problem Marvel can't ignore anymore. Marvel used to be unstoppable. The MCU was a cultural juggernaut with billion-dollar hits rolling out like clockwork. But now, the formula isn't working anymore. And the truth is, this isn't just about superhero fatigue. It's about a fundamental shift in the way audiences engage with Marvel. Marvel didn't just make successful movies. They conditioned audiences to expect a particular experience. Every MCU movie was designed to feel like a puzzle piece in a larger interconnected story, keeping viewers invested in what's next. But that strategy only works if audiences believe the puzzle is worth completing. And right now, they don't. Before Avengers Endgame, everything in the MCU was building towards something. The Infinity Saga had a clear trajectory. Every movie was another step toward the inevitable battle between the Avengers and Thanos. From the Avengers teasing the Mad Titan to Guardians of the Galaxy expanding cosmic lore to Infinity War setting up the devastating snap, audiences knew where the story was headed. Even if individual films varied in quality, the overarching narrative kept people invested. But with the multiverse saga, that clarity is gone. Marvel positioned Kang the Conqueror as the next Thanos-level threat spanning phases 4, 5, and 6. But Kang's motivations weren't immediately clear unless you watched Loki Season 1. His goal wasn't conquest, it was retirement. He wanted to step away from overseeing the sacred timeline, offering Loki and Sylvie the chance to take his place. The multiverse war only started because Sylvie killed Kang instead of accepting his offer, unleashing infinite versions of Kang into the timeline. And that's where Marvel raised the stakes so significantly that there are no stakes in the MCU anymore. If any of the Marvel heroes defeat Kang, another version of him is always there to take the prior one's place. Unlike Thanos, who had one singular goal, Kang's presence feels endless, making victory meaningless. And now, with Jonathan Majors fired, Marvel can't simply recast Kang, because Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania established that Jonathan Majors portrays every version of Kang across the multiverse. Unlike previous MCU recasts like Don Cheadle replacing Terrence Howard as War Machine, this situation isn't as simple as swapping actors. Contrast that with Loki Season 1, specifically Episode 5, Journey into Mystery. That episode introduced multiple Loki variants, but not all of them were played by Tom Hiddleston. Kid Loki was portrayed by Jack Veal, Classic Loki by Richard E. Grant, boastful Loki by Ariel Hota from Game of Thrones, and I do apologize, I cannot pronounce the actor's name to save my life, And even Alligator Loki existed as a completely different entity. Sylvie, the Loki variant who ultimately killed Kang, was another distinct version played by Sophia DiMartino. Marvel had the opportunity to take a similar approach with Kang, allowing different actors to portray different versions of him, but instead, Quantumania locked them into a single portrayal, Jonathan Majors as every Kang variant. That decision made recasting impossible, forcing Marvel to scramble for a new villain. Instead of restructuring the story, Marvel is shoehorning in Robert Downey Jr.'s return to the MCU as Doctor Doom, attempting to set up a new quote-unquote big bad for Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars. But here's the problem. Doctor Doom was never meant to be the central villain of the multiverse saga. His sudden inclusion feels like a last-minute fix rather than a carefully planned narrative shift. Without a central pillar holding the franchise together, the MCU feels fragmented with movies that don't connect in a meaningful way. And that's another problem Marvel can't afford to ignore anymore. One of Marvel's biggest mistakes post-Endgame? Overestimating audience investment in supporting characters. For years, the MCU was built around tentpole heroes. Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Spider-Man. These were franchise anchors, characters audiences were deeply invested in, with clear arcs, strong screen presence, and cultural impact. But Marvel's post-Endgame lineup leaned heavily on secondary characters who were never designed to lead their own films. Take Thunderbolts, for example. This movie was selling audiences a team made up of side characters: Bucky Barnes, Yelena Belova, Red Guardian, US Agent, Ghost, and Taskmaster. These aren't new characters, but they were never positioned. These aren't new characters, but they weren't positioned as marquee names. Marvel assumed people would show up just because they recognized the characters, but audiences don't just want familiarity, they want connection. Look at the Marvels, which tried to center Carol Danvers, Monica Rambeau, and Kamala Khan, but none of these characters had the kind of deep audience attachment needed to anchor a franchise. Part of the problem? 2/3 of the main cast weren't introduced through theatrical films. Monica Rambeau came from WandaVision, and Kamala Khan debuted in Ms. Marvel, both of which were Disney Plus series with lower viewership than blockbuster films. On top of that, the Marvels served as a continuation of Secret Invasion, a Disney Plus show that was widely panned and largely ignored by audiences. Marvel expected casual viewers to keep up with all these interconnected stories, but the reality is, most people didn't watch these shows, making the Marvels feel like homework instead of a must-see event. Meanwhile, Thunderbolts faced a similar issue. Audiences weren't invested enough in these secondary characters to see them lead a major film, and without a strong emotional hook, the movie collapsed at the box office. But here's the thing. Marvel has made ensemble movies with quote-unquote no-name characters before and succeeded. That brings us to the Guardians of the Galaxy.
What kind of feeling? I'm high on the lead.
Marvel has proven that it can take obscure characters and turn them into box office gold. But Thunderbolts failed where Guardians of the Galaxy succeeded. And to understand why, we have to look at the evolution of the Guardians in both the comics and the films, and the vastly different circumstances under which each film was released. The Guardians of the Galaxy in the comics were constantly rotating members, much like the Avengers. The lineup in the 2014 movie, its sequels, and the Disney Plus holiday special was based on the 2008 to 2010 comic run, which redefined the team and solidified the version audiences now associate with the MCU. This lineup included Star-Lord, Drax the Destroyer, Gamora, Rocket Raccoon, and Groot, but two major characters from the 2008 to 2010 comic run were missing: Adam Warlock and Phi Lavelle. While both were introduced later in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, their roles were significantly reimagined, with Adam Warlock portrayed as an antagonist rather than a core team member, and Phi Lavelle appearing as one of the genetically engineered children before officially joining the Guardians under Rocket's leadership. Despite these changes, the team felt cohesive. James Gunn gave each character depth, ensuring audiences formed emotional connections with them, even though they started as relative unknowns. That gamble paid off, but Guardians of the Galaxy was initially considered a massive risk for Marvel Studios. Unlike Iron Man or Captain America, the Guardians had no mainstream recognition, and Marvel was betting big on an ensemble featuring a talking raccoon and a sentient tree. But crucially, Guardians of the Galaxy came out in 2014, when the MCU was in its prime. The franchise was on an unstoppable streak following the successes of the Avengers, Iron Man 3, and Captain America the Winter Soldier. That goodwill gave audiences confidence in Marvel's ability to turn unknowns into household names. Compare that to Thunderbolts, which assembled a group of secondary characters without a strong emotional core, at a time when the MCU was in decline. Released in 2025, Thunderbolts couldn't rely on Marvel's momentum because that momentum was already gone. Unlike Guardians, where every character had a distinct role and meaningful arc, Thunderbolts felt like a collection of leftovers. But perhaps the biggest testament to the power of character-driven storytelling is Rocket Raccoon. Before Guardians of the Galaxy, Rocket was a bargain bin character, a relatively niche figure from Marvel Comics that few outside diehard fans even cared about. Yet thanks to the strong writing and Bradley Cooper's performance, Rocket became one of the MCU's most beloved characters, evolving from comedic relief into a fully realized, emotionally rich hero. Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 3 even centered its emotional arc around Rocket's backstory, cementing his status as a household name. Thunderbolts didn't have a character like Rocket, someone the audiences could emotionally latch onto, and without that foundation, the movie collapsed under its own weight. Marvel had the blueprint for how to make an ensemble work, but Thunderbolts proved that slapping together familiar faces isn't enough. Without strong character development, emotional resonance, and clear team chemistry, audiences won't care and won't show up at the box office. There's another reason Thunderbolts struggled. It wasn't just part of a dying MCU formula, it was also competing with DC's success in the quote-unquote supervillain team-up genre. Marvel wanted Thunderbolts to feel fresh, but the DCEU beat them to the punch nearly a decade earlier with Suicide Squad that released in 2016. While Suicide Squad didn't dominate the global box office compared to other superhero blockbusters, it was the biggest movie at the domestic box office, US and Canada, for the entire month of August 2016. DC successfully positioned its villains as a compelling team, taking characters like Harley Quinn, Deadshot, and Captain Boomerang, and turning them into bankable names. Marvel tried to apply the same formula, but Thunderbolts didn't have the same cultural weight behind it. DC's villain team up concept wasn't a one-off. It became a franchise. In 2021, The Suicide Squad, this time directed by James Gunn, the man behind Guardians of the Galaxy, was a critical success, proving the formula still worked when handled correctly. And DC expanded it even further, launching 2 spin-offs. Birds of Prey, which centered on Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, one of the standout characters from Suicide Squad, and Peacemaker, an HBO series starring John Cena, which took a minor character from the Suicide Squad and built an entire successful show around him. By the time Thunderbolts arrived, the quote-unquote anti-hero squad trend had already peaked. Audiences weren't craving another team of morally gray characters, especially when DC had already done it first and arguably better. This isn't just about Thunderbolts. Marvel keeps arriving late to trends, and that's a problem. Which leads us to the bigger issue, superhero oversaturation. Another issue? Superhero fatigue. Marvel has flooded the market with movies and TV shows, making it harder for audiences to stay invested. But this isn't just about quantity. It's about how Marvel's approach to television has changed. Before Disney Plus became Marvel's streaming home, the studio had a different approach to TV, one that kept its shows at arm's length from the MCU's main continuity. The Netflix Marvel shows Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and The Defenders were grittier, street-level stories that operated on the fringes of the MCU. While these shows referenced events from the movies, they were never truly integrated into the larger narrative. The Avengers were mentioned, but the films never acknowledged the Netflix heroes in return. Even when Daredevil became a fan favorite, Marvel kept the character separate until Charlie Cox's Matt Murdock finally appeared in Spider-Man No Way Home and She-Hulk. Compare that to the Disney Plus era, where Marvel fully merged its TV shows with the MCU. Series like WandaVision, Loki, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Ms. Marvel weren't just side stories, they were essential viewing for understanding the movies. But that approach created a new problem. Audiences felt overwhelmed. Instead of optional spin-offs, Marvel's Disney Plus shows became required homework, making it harder for casual viewers to keep up. One of the biggest consequences of Marvel making its Disney Plus shows required viewing was that Phase 4 became longer than Phases 1, 2, and 3 combined. Before Disney Plus, the MCU's phases were relatively contained. Phase 1 had 6 movies totaling 12 hours and 24 minutes. Phase 2 expanded with 6 more films, reaching 12 hours and 38 minutes. Phase 3 was the biggest yet, with 11 movies totaling 24 hours and 12 minutes. Together, phases 1 to 3 amounted to approximately 49 hours of content. Then came Phase 4, which exploded in length due to the introduction of Disney Plus shows. Instead of just movies, Phase 4 included multiple TV series such as WandaVision, Loki Season 1, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, What If Season 1, Hawkeye, Ms. Marvel, Moon Knight, and She-Hulk Attorney at Law. With 7 movies, 8 Disney Plus shows, and 2 Disney Plus specials, Werewolf by Night and Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, Phase 4 ballooned to approximately 57 hours of content, making it longer than the first 3 phases combined. And to put this into perspective, Phases 1 through 3, even though they were 49 hours of content, were spread out over the course of 11 years. Phase 4 all came out within just 2 years, 2021 to 2023. Suddenly, keeping up with the MCU required watching hours of television, making the franchise feel overwhelming. The only year that didn't suffer from oversaturation? 2024, which only had 2 major releases. Deadpool and Wolverine, a theatrical film that stood on its own without requiring prior Disney Plus knowledge, and Agatha All Along, a Disney Plus series that was a spin-off of WandaVision, but didn't carry the same weight as Marvel's interconnected shows. Marvel's TV struggles didn't start with Disney Plus. They go all the way back to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Premiering in 2013 on ABC, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was originally designed to tie into the MCU. Early seasons directly referenced the movies, with storylines connected to Iron Man 3, Thor: The Dark World, and Captain America: The Winter Soldier. But the connection only went one way. The movies never acknowledged the show. The biggest crossover moment? The opening of Avengers: Age of Ultron, which was the conclusion to a 5-episode storyline in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Beyond that, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. gradually became its own separate entity, eventually diverging from MCU continuity altogether. Despite this disconnect, the series remained deeply beloved by its fans, earning praise for its character development, storytelling, and commitment to expanding Marvel lore in ways the films never explored. In fact, there was strong fan demand to bring Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. onto Disney+, ensuring its legacy remained accessible despite its lack of deep integration into the MCU's main narrative. Marvel may have left Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. out of the larger franchise's storylines, but audiences never forgot it, and they still celebrate it today. Marvel's biggest issue now? There's too much content and not enough audience investment. In the early days, the MCU was manageable. With only a handful of movies per phase, audiences could easily follow the overarching story without feeling overwhelmed. But now, between theatrical films and Disney Plus shows, the franchise has ballooned to an unmanageable size, making it harder for casual viewers to stay engaged. The Netflix Marvel shows, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and The Defenders, were meant to expand the MCU without directly tying into it. While these shows referenced events from the movies, the films never acknowledged them in return, creating a one-sided relationship that kept them separate from the larger narrative. Then came Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which tried to integrate more closely with the MCU. Early seasons directly referenced events from the movies, with the biggest crossover being the opening of Avengers: Age of Ultron, which served as the conclusion to a 5-episode storyline in the show. But as time went on, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was pushed further into its own continuity, never receiving recognition in the films. Despite that disconnect, the series remains deeply beloved, leading to a strong fan demand to bring it to Disney Plus, proving that audiences still celebrate it today, even if Marvel failed to fully embrace it. Then came the Disney Plus era, which transformed Marvel's TV strategy entirely. Instead of separate, self-contained shows, the Disney Plus series were required viewing, making it essential to watch multiple TV shows just to understand the movies. The result? Phase 4 became longer than Phases 1, 2, and 3 combined, spanning 57 hours of content compared to the 49-hour total of the Infinity Saga. Suddenly, the MCU was no longer just movies, it was a full-time commitment, making it harder for audiences to keep up. The only year that didn't suffer from oversaturation was 2024, with only 2 major releases. Deadpool and Wolverine, a theatrical film that stood on its own requiring no prior Disney Plus knowledge, and Agatha All Along, a Disney Plus series connected to WandaVision, but not essential to the larger MCU storyline. At the heart of Marvel's oversaturation problem is one crucial mistake. Instead of making each project feel essential, Marvel has overloaded audiences, making engagement more exhausting than exciting. So, where does Marvel go from here? The studio is reevaluating its strategy, slowing down production, and shifting focus toward big-name projects like Avengers Doomsday, Spider-Man 4, and Avengers Secret Wars. But that leads us to a much bigger question. Can Marvel survive without its legacy characters? Thunderbolts proved that familiar faces alone aren't enough to drive success. The MCU's formula no longer guarantees a hit, and audiences have shown that they need more than nostalgia to stay engaged. Marvel once thrived on innovation, bringing lesser-known characters into the mainstream, like the Guardians of the Galaxy and Doctor Strange, but today, the franchise feels trapped in its own past, relying on old icons, multiverse cameos, and nostalgia-driven storytelling. So where does it go from here? Can Marvel reinvent itself and recapture what made it special, or has the golden era of superhero storytelling finally come to an end? Let me know your thoughts. Where do you think the MCU is headed next?